What's up, guys, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Robbie Cassidy, and today we're going to discuss applying the principles of progressive overload to mobility training. So, in today's podcast, I have covered one similar to this, and it was integrating mobility training into strength previously, and that was in the 20s. I don't know exactly which one it was. It was between 20 and 25, I think. But in this podcast, I want to talk a bit more specifically about just progressive overload itself and how that you can apply that to mobility training. So what we mean is, how can you progressively increase the load in your sessions to get the most out of your sessions? Now, and it does depend on what side of mobility you're looking at as well. So we will discuss that as we go through it. Now, before I jump into it, I want to talk a small bit about my tolerance programs that are out at the moment. So I have a hamstring tolerance, and then I have a hip and knee and a shoulder tolerance will be out very soon. And the programs are basically prehab or injury prevention programs. So the hamstring one specifically works on strength, mobility, and plyometric or explosiveness. Okay, and it really targets the hips and the hamstring. And the idea is, the reason it's called a tolerance program is because the majority of injuries happen when you do too much too fast after doing too little too long. Okay, so you need to build tolerance. You need to be able to handle load, and if you can't handle load, the hamstring will tear. So the program itself, as I said, it includes all those, that mobility, strength, plyometric, explosiveness, and then on top of that, it also has a hamstring-specific warm-up example that you can use in your own training sessions, in your own pitch sessions, and before a game. And that's just to give you a better idea of what you should include when you are warming up, because a lot of people are doing the wrong things when they're warming up. They're not hitting the right areas, and because of that, then they're going out on the pitch and they're tearing a hamstring very early. And then on top of that, I also go into load management and program design in it. And load management obviously talks about how to plan, how to have an overview of your sessions. The program design then talks about if you're using it in season or if you're using it out of season. If you're using it in season, it's really, really important that you actually work it into days that you are doing it. So like your training days. So if that's a pitch session, do it after a pitch session or mix into your gym session. But it also talks about including recovery days. And if you have a match at the weekend, when you should be doing it, when the last days you should be doing it and all that. So you can check that out. It's on my website at mobilitytutor.com, and it's a hamstring tolerance program, and the hip and knee as well. It should be out by the time this podcast comes out. Now, to jump right into the podcast, I want to discuss progressive overload, and is it important? So we'll just get straight into it. Is progressive overload important in mobility training? The first thing is, it is extremely important. It's important in any type of training, especially when you're training the body, because the only way the body will adapt and get better is if you apply a novel stimulus to it, okay? And that's the only thing that's going to drive adaptation across the board. If you're trying to improve your strength, if you're trying to improve your speed, if you're trying to reduce your risk of injury, if you're trying to improve your balance, if you're trying to improve your hearing, your visual system, absolutely anything, if you're trying to learn faster, you need novel stimulus, and you need a certain amount of it so that your body will adapt and change and improve because of that. So it is definitely important in mobility training. I do it with all my athletes or anyone that I'm working with. I apply the same principles across if I'm doing physio as well, because the body loves to adapt. If it's not improving, it's disimproving, or it's getting worse, and it's really important to keep that in mind. If you don't use it, you lose it, and it's something that I always drive. Now, what are the reasons for using it? One of the main things is that if you build strength and security around an area, and we'll talk about joints specific here now in this podcast, because when we're talking about mobility, there's obviously a load of different facets of it, or you can look at it in different ways, but what mobility is, it's movement, and it's improving movement. So, but on an isolated level, you're looking at joints and joint security, okay? So you're obviously looking at a neurological level on one side, and another level you're looking at joints and joint security, and the two of them do come together in basically everything. So if the joint is insecure, if it feels like it's uncomfortable, if the body feels like a joint is uncomfortable, like you've injured it before, then what will happen is around that area you'll start to get this pain sensitivity will increase. So you'll start to get a lot more pain with movement around that. Now, also, the muscles around the area will get tight to protect it and stop you moving that joint into certain positions. And because of that, you'll find that the body then, this pain, this tightness will creep up. You won't know what's causing it, and you won't know where it's coming from. And if you don't basically start to use that joint and start to improve it and start to strengthen it, that'll get worse and worse over time. And you see it with people that are getting older, who aren't using their body as much. they will slowly but surely lose a lot of their range and lose a lot of their movement capability as well, because of the fact that they aren't using it as much as they used to. So their body starts to protect itself, it starts to get tight and it starts to get sore. Now, so the first thing you can do with progressive overload is you can help to reduce that pain sensitivity around an area, because of the fact that you make it stronger, you make it more comfortable. Now, how do you do that? What I would say is you're looking to build strength at length, and you'll hear me talking about this throughout this length tension relationship. So your length tension relationship is basically how strong you are, or you're looking at levers basically. Okay, and just a quick example. So if you're doing a bicep curl, because everyone knows what a bicep curl is, and you extend your arm out to the last, when your arm is locked out, that's when it's hardest to actually curl the weight up, because the muscle fibers are fully stretched. Basically, the filaments there the actin and myosin aren't able to bind as much in the muscle itself, so they're gripping onto whatever they can. Okay, as opposed to if you start a bicep curl halfway up, like a pull-up is another one. Trying to do a pull-up from the very bottom is very difficult, but if you just let yourself down a couple of inches, it's way easier. And that's because most of those filaments or most of that actin and myosin heads have already binded in the muscle, so it's a lot easier to bind more because they've already a good base. And what you're doing when you're building strength at length with a mobility and you're applying these progressive overload techniques is you're basically working on those actin and myosin heads, so they're stronger throughout the range, and that you're not just strong at the top when the muscle is shortest. Well, you always are going to be strong when the muscle is short, but you're looking to build strength at length so that you can be strong and have control all around. And it plays over to sports, it plays over to life. If you have a lot more control over your joints, your body will feel a lot freer, you'll feel a lot more comfortable in yourself, and you'll be able to take on any new task. Okay, as opposed to if you're weak in different ranges, you will find that it'll be a lot more difficult, or you'll feel tight if you try to go into other ranges, and you'll get a lot of pain and you won't be as comfortable moving. Okay, so you're looking to build strength at length so you can move a lot better. Now, as I said, you need to load that so you can progressively overload that by adding weight is one of the simplest ways. Then you can also look at tempos, and your tempo is like adding a timer to it. So let's say if you're looking at concentric, eccentric, isometric, what you're doing is you are like a tempo would be like a 5-second eccentric. So an eccentric is when the muscle is lengthening. So that's when you're at the very top, let's say in your bicep curl, and you're letting that weight down. And instead of just letting it smack down, you're controlling it all the way down to the bottom. And that's an eccentric contraction. When the muscle is lengthening and it's just holding, it's still just holding. So it's gripping and letting go all the way down. Now, if you apply a tempo to that, you can look at maybe applying a 5-second eccentric tempo. What that means is you're starting at the top, then you start to let your arm down and you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, lock it out at the bottom. And then at the bottom, it's like you can have a tempo of like a 0-second rest, 1 second rest, 2 second rest, 3 second rest, and same with the concentric. All the way up, you go 1, 2, 3. Now, if you're doing, let's say, explosive exercises, what you'll find the tempos, it'll be like 0 at the bottom and it'll be like 0 on the way up, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get it up as fast as you can. You don't want any time there at all, and that's working power. But if you're working for control, you need to slow it down a small bit more. So all the way down, control it all the way up as well, and then back down again. Okay, so maybe you could actually change it to maybe a 2-second, 3-second, 4-second tempo, or if you wanted to, you could really change it to like an 8 or 10-second, which is obviously going to be a bit more difficult, but it's just working on a bit more control through that muscle. Okay, so that's your concentric and eccentric way of applying progressive overload. Now, you can do the same with a squat. A squat, you're just starting from the top, you're lowering yourself down and you're counting as you go down. So what you're doing with these tempos is you're increasing your time under tension all the time. Okay, and I would start off doing them first and then start adding weight as you go after that. Get used to actually doing the time and controlling it, and then add weight. And there's actually research as well in the fact that if it's rhythmic, your body prioritizes it more. So when it comes to a rehab setting, and this is actually something I do with guys in a rehab setting a lot, is that we'd use a metronome, or we might use a counter, we might even use music if I have them skipping, something like that. Because if you're in rhythm, if your body has to go to a rhythm which is like 1, 2, 3, 4 and has to follow that, it takes a lot more brain areas or areas of your brain, I should say, to coordinate that. And if it does that, then your brain will prioritize it higher in its list of things that needs to get fixed, and you'll find that you'll heal a lot faster. So it's something that I've been including more recently is tempos and times, but more for a rhythmic thing, just more for trying to use as many brain areas as we can when we are working through a movement. So that's another simple way of doing it. Now, the other thing you're looking at is you need to load the joint in various ranges as well, because it needs to get comfortable. Now, this is more looking at like a shoulder or a hip where it's a ball and socket joint, and there's multiple different ranges that it can go into, and as opposed to a bicep curl where it's just up and down. And with these, then you can do a lot more. You can play around with them a lot more, like single leg squats, doing Cossack squats, even doing things like bear crawls. You could be doing reverse bear crawls, scorpions, anything like that. You're loading it in different ranges, and obviously what I do is I'd start off first with no weight at all, and then I'd look to add resistance bands and look to add weights if they need it. A lot of the time you don't need it, but if you do need it, you're looking to load them in various ranges so that it gets a lot more comfortable. So looking at the shoulder, for example, if someone has had a shoulder dislocation, there'll be certain positions that they definitely don't want to go in. External rotation will be one of them a lot of the time, because the body will remember that that's how they dislocated their shoulder. So to get them more comfortable, so to stop them going into that position, I should say, it'll lock up and you'll get a lot of pain there. So to get them getting more comfortable to use these positions and to build the shoulder stability all around, build mobility up in the shoulder, how would you apply progressive overload? Well, simple things you can start off with would be like a push-up, just a normal push-up down on the ground, going up and down. Progressive overload, start at 5, then go up to 10, then go up to 15, and start adding tempos. And then what you can do after that is you can actually get them to shift over onto one arm. So they put one arm on the ground and they put one arm out in front of them. It's still on the ground, but it's only, like, let's say 70% of the pressure is going through your right arm, while 30% of it is going through your left arm because it's out in front of you. And then you get them to do push-ups there. And that's just another novel stimulus. What I do as well is I get them to put the arm out to the side, so they're pressing out to the side, and they're getting them to push through that, because it's a different position, it's a different range, it's something that the body wouldn't be comfortable in. And I might use isometrics in that position, or I might use concentrics, or I might use eccentric movements, depending on what I'm trying to achieve. Okay, so an isometric, and I'll talk about isometric in a couple of minutes, is an excellent way of building strength, stability, co-contraction. It works everything, and security around an area, so it can take down sensitivity through that as well. And an isometric is basically when it's not moving at all. So if you were doing what would be an easy isometric, if you were trying to push the wall, basically, that would be a push isometric. If you were just pushing as hard as you can against the wall because you had no equipment and you said, this is the only thing I have, and you were trying to build upper body strength, you could do that. Obviously you could do push-ups on the ground, I know you could do that, but an isometric is when you're putting severe pressure through something, serious pressure, but it's not moving at all, the muscle is staying in the same position. Very, very, very good in a rehab setting, because it does teach the body to contract, to use a movement. I suppose, how would you say it? It does. I'm trying to pick the easiest words now, so I don't go into some mad way of saying it. But basically, it builds strength and stability. It's a very safe way of doing it, because you know exactly when you can stop, and then it retrains the body. That's the word I was looking for. It retrains the body to use that joint more effectively or efficiently, because it's under pressure for so long. Isometrics, time-wise, it can be between 15 seconds to 45 seconds to a minute. 45 seconds in general is a very good marker for an isometric when you're looking at lower limb anyway. Upper limb is a small bit different, but lower limb, 45 seconds is an excellent isometric time, because it brings it to the point of fatigue nearly always, and it challenges the body to try coordinate that movement while you are doing it. So you'll see in a lot of lower body programs that they'll have like hamstring bridges that last for 45 seconds, because you'll see the leg will start to shake, the calf needs to contract, the hamstring needs to contract at the same time, and the only way it's going to do that is that if it's working as effectively and as efficiently as possible. If it's not working efficiently and effectively, it'll drop, and they won't be able to hold it, and the body will have to figure that out. Because you have to remember, it's not you that's figuring it out. It is in a way, you are kind of trying to figure it out, but what you're doing is you're applying the stimulus, and then you're letting the nervous system figure it out. And it's the nervous system that's actually figuring it out, how it's coordinating and how it's using the movements and how it can implement these movements in a different situation. So it is the nervous system that is doing that. And people get confused with that sometimes. So you are just letting the body fix itself, is what I always tell guys and girls. So on top of that, using isometrics, you can build tendon stiffness and tendon strength not just through using isometric, using concentric and eccentric ones, and using that length tension relationship, you can really build tendon stiffness and tendon strength. Now, the only thing with that is it really depends on the sport as well that you're going into. So you are looking to build tendon stiffness, because that means that, like, tendon stiffness in your Achilles means that you can, and joint strength around the ankle means that you can produce more force when you're running, because you don't lose force. It doesn't pop out the side. You're not losing force anywhere. It's very directed. And the same thing through the hip as well. You're trying to keep it when you're driving, when you're sprinting, when you're doing stuff like that, especially straight line sprinting. You're really trying to put as much pressure through the forefoot as you can and not give off any force coming out the side, okay? So if you have any breakages in it, then, like, if the ankle is weak, if the tendon is weak, then you're losing it there, okay? And you won't be able to get the optimal speed or optimal performance because of that, in a way, okay? So that's why you're looking at tendon stiffness, tendon strength, and joint stability when it comes to performance side of things. Now, it does completely depend on your sport. So you're not always just looking to load joints through their full range of motion all of the time, because in certain sports, that's not optimal. Like, let's say for a sprinter, 100-meter sprinter, in general, it's not optimal to load a 100-meter sprinter ass to grass squat, because they never get into that position when they're running. So it's a lot more optimal just to load them so the knee is slightly bent, let's say, okay? It's optimal to do that, as opposed to getting them to go all the way down to the ground where they're never going to use, and you're building strength through full range of motion, which is excellent, and it's a good way of doing it. But when it comes to performance, and performance is different as well. Now, obviously, rehab and performance are similar and nearly the same thing. But in this situation, the length-tension relationship is you're looking to build as much strength as possible and much stability as possible in a small range of motion, as opposed to having a full range of motion, okay? Because you need to think of what they're using. And it comes back to energy utilization. So actually, the body being able to allocate energy in the places that need it, okay, and muscle gain and muscle mass in places that need it. For a sprinter, they need it obviously in their glutes and their hamstrings and their quads and their calves and that, but they don't need to sit down on the ground ass to grass, because there's no benefit to them in that situation. A weightlifter now is different, because they do need to get down into that position. Like someone who's doing snatch, they will need to be able to get into that position, and they need to be strong in that position to be able to get out of it again. So you can see it does change. So working at full length there is more important. Now, some common mistakes that I see when people are mobility training is that there's probably a bit too much focus on static stretching and flexibility at the moment. And flexibility is okay. Like I have no real love for it at the moment. And static stretching, I don't really have a love for it at all anymore. I actually used to push it, but the more I looked into the research, and that there wasn't as much of a benefit as I initially thought. So flexibility is something that I kind of move away from a bit now. I look at mobility more, because flexibility is the length that a muscle can stretch, okay, passively. So it's how much you can stretch if you're just leaning down into it, how far it will go. But it doesn't mean that you are able to contract in that situation. It doesn't mean that you're strong in that position. So really, it's just it's a show thing, nearly, is what you could say. It doesn't provide the benefits for performance that I would be looking for in athletes that I'm working with, okay? And then other things people are relying on, like foam rollers, massage guns, a small bit too much, because the short-term benefit of the range of motion improvement. Granted, if you're using them and you're hitting a mobility session right after and you're really working on that range of motion, but if you're not doing that, the nervous system isn't going to pick up on it. It isn't going to get any better at it, and it's a short-term thing, so it's going to be gone the next day until you do it again. And then lastly, I think people not actually including some form of resistance training in their mobility training is really important. So muscles and joints are there to move bones. They're there to move bones against gravity. So a resistance, you could say. Now, resistance training itself is going to help strengthen those joints, muscles, and it'll help control that area, control the joints, control the bones, so you can do it optimally. And you have a lot more stability, you're less injury prone. And really that's it in a nutshell. Like you're trying to build strength so that the joints are able to control your body a lot better, and that there isn't positions that you go into that you feel uncomfortable in, or that you go into and that you're at risk of injury. And that's why building it in different ranges, as I said earlier on, is really, really important. So if the body feels it has control, it'll be better able to cope with the load and the force that's put through it, and you'll be less likely to injure yourself. And that is as I said in a nutshell, that is what you're trying to do. So you really are trying to build strength throughout all these different ranges, so the body is able to handle whatever load you put on it. And the last mistake that I see people doing, and I don't mean to finish on this now, but is that people overload it too much and then they don't give it enough recovery time. And you always hear me on about recovery. So if you're overloading it too much, especially when you're looking at tendons, if you're overloading tendons too much at full range all the time, you can cause a tendinopathy. So it's really, really important to actually take the time to recover. And it comes back to it all the time. I say it so often. Recovery is as important as the training itself. If you're not recovering properly, you're going to find that you just pick up small injuries out of nowhere and you won't know what's happening. And recovery just comes back to the simplest things. I've done so many podcasts on it. I would definitely recommend check out recovery strategies. I've done optimizing recovery is another one. They all go into detail on how to actually recover as best you can. So as I said, you need to include some form of resistance training, but you need to recover at the same time. So there has to be a nice mix of the two, really, to get the best out of it. So guys, that's kind of everything I wanted to talk to you today. I wanted to keep this podcast short and snappy to get through what I needed to get through. It was actually one that was sent in as well by a person. They were asking me about how would you apply progressive overload to mobility training. As I said, you're just looking at the same principles as you are at strength training. You're just trying to maybe change it so that you are doing it in different ranges a bit more. Strength training, a lot of the compound movements are excellent, but you can use different accessory movements then in mobility. And then you're also looking at how you can include isometrics, because they're excellent for strength and stability. As I was saying, they retrain the body to work more effectively. You're looking to work eccentrically, so you can control a position. And like when it comes to sports, a hamstring is most commonly torn in an eccentric movement. So that's why Nordics are such an effective exercise for it. And then obviously concentrically as well, where you are using the muscle, shortening the muscle, that's going to be really important as well. And you are, as I said, looking at that length-tension relationship. That's the basis of what you're trying to do a lot of the time when you're working on these strength at length. That's what you are looking at. And as I said, that's when the arm is straightened out. It's hardest to bicep curl, but the shorter or the closer you get that weight to you, the easier it is to curl. But yeah, guys, that's everything I wanted to discuss today. I'm just going to finish on it as well. I will have a couple of spots opening up now in the next few months for coaching. If anyone has like long-term injuries that you are sick of recurring, like let's say your back keeps flaring up and you don't know why, you've had shoulder surgeries, you've maybe even had a back surgery, you've had hip surgeries or knee surgeries, and you want to just finally get them right, well then get in contact with me, because I'll be taking on clients. The majority of my clients have long-term injuries or have, let's say, mobility issues as well, and they just want to get them right. There's a huge educational component to the one-to-one training with me, so we do our calls every week. So that is the main thing, and I say to everybody, if you think it's just a one and done that you come and I give you your program and you work away, it won't work that way. It's an educational thing. I will be asking you each week, we'll be discussing different things, and I'll be seeing what your understanding is like on it, because there's no point just coming to me giving you something working excellent for the next 6 months, and then in 6 months time you coming back again saying, right, the same thing happened again, because I'd prefer to have you educated so you know what's going on, how you can fix it, what you can do if a flare-up happens, what you do for that. So that's why I really, really push that educational side of things. If anyone is looking to do that, definitely send me a message on Instagram or LinkedIn or an email at mobilitytutor@gmail.com, and we can discuss it in more detail. We can look at what your issues are, and there's no problem if you have a couple of them as well. If it's your knee and your hip and your back and your toe and your shoulder, we can look at it all. That's why the holistic approach is such an important component of my style of coaching. And then on top of that, guys, if you're looking for that hamstring protocol, if you're looking for the knee and hip, and you're looking for the shoulder be out soon, the knee and hip should be out at the time this podcast comes out, and the hamstring one is there right now. Check it out. The link is in my bio on Mobility Tutor at Instagram, or it's on my website at mobilitytutor.com. And it's a prehab program, excellent for in-season, excellent for off-season, whatever you need it. Reduces your risk of hamstring injury, gets rid of hamstring tightness, and helps you perform at the best you can throughout the season, so you're not sitting on the sideline looking in at the game. Okay, so check that out, guys. It has a lot more detail on my website. Other than that, thank you so much for listening again this week. I would love if you could share this with a friend who you think would be interested, or if you could even stick it up on your story, that would go a long way in promoting the podcast. And then on top of that, I would love if you could leave a rating or subscribe on iTunes. That also goes a long way in promoting the podcast. So guys, that's everything from me today. Hopefully you took some value for that. Hopefully that you have a better understanding of how to apply the principles of progressive overload, what you should be looking at in mobility training. But yeah, thanks a million guys. Thanks for listening. I'll chat to you all again next week. Have a good one.